Our scripture mornings found in the book of Romans, 8th chapter, 17th verse, which reads, "And since we are his children, we are his heirs. In fact, together with Christ, we're heirs of God's glory. But if we are to share his glory, we must also share his suffering." Friends, may recognize that being a Christian is not all peaches and ice cream. There are times when we're going to suffer. There will be times when it's difficult. When we hear people bring a gospel that sounds differently, that only promises the good and never anything unpleasant, we know it's not the true gospel. So help us be wise and mindful of that, and remembering that Christ died on the cross, and we must also share his suffering as we're advised. Amen. The title of today's message is, "You Matter to God." As we go through life, many times we find ourselves in circumstances that are unpleasant, that are difficult. They may require us to make hard decisions. What we need to remember is that after we've done all that we can dealing with the situation, there are things that we cannot deal with, obstacles we cannot overcome. God is there to carry what we're not able to. Okay. But as we go through life, we see chasms. And I really like that mission story we had this morning, because it shows some chasms, as we're going to see in a minute. You know, big gaps that sometimes, as we go through life, looks like there's a chasm in front of us, this big gap. There's something we can't bridge or get over. God has promised us good things, but the reality is, how am I going to deal with this? What may these chasms in our lives be? It could be massive disappointments. That happens to people at times. Deep hurts, letdowns, harsh realities, things you didn't see coming. All of a sudden, wham! It hits you from behind. Unbridgeable abyss, like we see here. How do you get across here? Well, in this case, someone put some cables across. Even with those cables, I wouldn't be too excited about crossing that chasm. No, not at all. But life looks that way sometimes. Sometimes it looks like I'm going to have to take a tremendous leap. I don't have the strength to actually do this. I'm not able. But what we need to do, friends, is believe in our God, to believe him, not the ugly right in front of us. If all we can see and believe in is ugly right in front of us, we're not going to go very far. We're going to be stymied. We're going to be frustrated. Nothing good will be happening. So we need to be all in, walking in faith. Otherwise, you may as well throw in the towel, not just throw in the towel, stomp on it. That's giving up. That's quitting. That's frustration. That hurts. Well, look to back in 2 Kings, about the nation of Judah. They had King Hezekiah. And as we've been noting lately, the Bible tends to have patterns in the ways it presents things. We see, first of all, it's given the time in the third year of Hosea, son of Eliah, king of Israel, Hezekiah, the son of Ahaz, king of Judah, began to reign. So we have a little bit of history here in the time frame, so we know who and when. He was 25 years old when he began to reign. He reigned 29 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name is Abi, the daughter of Zechariah. So we have a little background there. And this is what's great and why Hezekiah has a good reputation. You oftentimes hear the phrase, good King Hezekiah. He did what's right in the eyes of the Lord, according to all that David his father had done. He removed the high places and broke the pillars and cut down the Ashtoreth. The custom of the pagans, or many of them anyway, they had other customs, was to construct a place of worship on a high hill. And associated with this was altars and also these Ashtoreth. Ashtoreth were kind of like totem poles. I should have got an illustration for this. If you're familiar with the customs of the Indians that occupied the northwestern portion of the United States and Alaska, in that general area, they would like to take a pole and carve faces and images into it. These were places of worship for them. That was not a new idea. The pagans back in the time of Hezekiah were already doing this. But he cut these down. These were articles of pagan worship. And God was pleased with this. They also had another problem. You remember the bronze serpent that Moses made to facilitate deliverance from the fiery vipers that God had inflicted upon the disobedient Israelites. But God not only inflicted them, he provided a way of relief. But the people had taken to worshiping this. It was just a symbol that God had Moses create. It wasn't something to be worshipped, but they started worshiping it. And when he recognized this, he had it broken. He had it destroyed because he trusted in the Lord, the God of Israel. And as I said here, there's none like him among all the kings of Judah after him, nor among those who were before him. For he held fast to the Lord. He did not depart from following him, but kept the commandments that the Lord commanded Moses. That's what we should be doing, friends. Being obedient, following God, doing what we're instructed to. And the Lord was with him. Wherever he went, he prospered. God will bless us, friends, but there's a condition. It's called obedience. However, there was a very powerful pagan king from the neighboring large, powerful nation called Assyria. He was not kowtowing to this pagan king. He wasn't following him. He wasn't doing what he wanted to, and he would not serve him. But this king was struck down the Philistines as far as Gaza and its territory, whether it's a watchtower, fortified city, whatever it is. We will move on to the fourth year of King Hezekiah, and which is the seventh year of Hosea, son of Elah, king of Israel. We see here a comparison between the kingdoms of Judah and the kingdom of Israel, which had split. This relates to last week's message, where remember the prophet took a new cloth which he was wearing and tore it in 12 pieces. He gave 10 to Judah, and the remaining 2 were for Israel. He had symbolized this by the tearing of the cloth. And now at this time, the king of Assyria was named Shalmaneser. He came up against Samaria to besiege it. Besieging a city basically meant that the enemy would come around the fortified city and surround it so nobody could get in or out. After a while, conditions would become very difficult because there was a lack of food and sometimes even water within. But with sufficient time, most cities would eventually succumb to their attackers. In this case, it took 3 years. So this happened in 6th year Hezekiah, which is the 9th year Hosea, king of Israel, again comparing the 2 kingdoms. So that's when Samaria was taken. So the king of Assyria carried the Israelites away to his Assyria and to various places, to Halal, Harbor, the river goes in the cities of the Medes. At this point in history, it was normal practice for conquering kings not just to take the valuables of a place that they conquered and the wealth, but they took the people too. So the land left behind was relatively destitute. They leave a few farmers and herders to occupy the land, but all the people that they considered to be useful, they took with them, and they became slaves and servants. So why this happened? Because they did not obey God. They transgressed His covenant and the ordinances and commandments which they've been delivered to by the hand of Moses. They neither listened nor obeyed. Now we find a successive king, still in the reign of King Hezekiah, the 14th year. Then Sennacherib, the new king of Syria, came up against all the fortified cities of Judah, and he took them all. He didn't have a big problem with those. Those cities weren't so big or so strong. And then what's happened? Well, Hezekiah, who's reigning in Jerusalem, it's coming my way. What's next? He's sending messages. I've done wrong. He's kind of being apologetic, you know. Yeah, I haven't been obedient to you. I haven't wanted to be a vassal. Withdraw. Go away, please. Whatever you oppose me, bear. Hey, what's your price? Okay. So he went through the kingdom and found everything he could find. 300 talents of silver, 30 talents of gold. Everything was in God's house. Everything in his treasury. He stripped all the wealth. Not only that, they stripped the gold that was as an overlay. The doors of the temple and the doorposts, anything they could find, they gave this guy, hey, bug off, leave us alone, please, you've got it all. He was not satisfied. He sent a delegation of his chief people. Use the terms here, Tartan, the Rabsaris, and the Rabshakeh. Rabshakeh is kind of like the prime minister of Assyria. Sent all these guys down with a big army, and they went up and came in Jerusalem. And they stood outside, and they called for the king. Well, the king himself wasn't personally coming. He sent a delegation, just like the Assyrian king sent a delegation. So we said, Eliakim, the son of Hilkiah, was over the house of Shebna, the secretary, and joined the son of the recorder. So they sent the chief officers to talk to him. Your chief officer, our chief officer, we're going to talk. Of course, theirs are staying inside the walls, and they're hollering down. And so Rabshakeh says, say, Hezekiah, thus says a great king, the king of Assyria, on what do you rest this trust of yours? You're confident in what? I've stopped everybody around here. I've broken through all their fortifications. They're all subject to me. What do you think you're better? What do you think you're different? What are you confident in? What do you rest this trust of yours? You think mere words of strategy and powerful war? You just talk. That's all you are. In whom do you have trust if you rebelled against me? What he was really doing, and we'll see some more here, he's putting down the God of Hezekiah. The way people thought back then, and people don't do this consciously nowadays, was if I kick your butt, that's because my God's better than your God. And this is how the different nations thought, and as they looked at Israel's God the same way. You're trusting now in Egypt. Now, Egypt, at this point in history, had been stomped. They've been defeated. So we're saying, you trust in someone's defeated. They're weak. They're just like a broken reed. You lean on it, go through your hand. It's good for nothing. And he's actually, at this point in history, putting Pharaoh. But if you say to me, we trust in the Lord our God. What? You put down all these high places, and he's saying, you shall worship before this altar in Jerusalem? So he is dissing the true God because he believes in this pagan God. Well, he had a reason to. He had been defeating everybody he ran into. Okay, I'll make a wager with you. I'll give you 2,000 horses. You got it, men to sit on him? He couldn't answer the question. It's putting him down. So how can you repulse the least of my servants? You can't beat them. Really put him down. You trust in Egypt. Now, Egypt here is more symbolic for chariots and horsemen. Now, realize at this time in history, it was common for when one nation is being attacked, they'd call in a stronger neighbor to help them, to get with them, to defeat the enemy. But that wasn't working here. Moreover, it is without the Lord that I've come up against this place to destroy it. The Lord said to me, go up against this land to destroy it. Now, this is really interesting. The king of Assyria had some knowledge of God, and he had a perception that God wanted him to carry out these attacks. He did. And all the people who had been disobedient to God, they'd been taken captive. Their city has been broken through. But that wasn't God's will for Jerusalem. Why? Because the people there were obedient. We'll see what happens. So a delegation from King Hezekiah said, hey, speak to us in Aramaic, please. And the reason for this was they didn't want the people on the inside to understand what was being said. They didn't want to be scared. So don't speak in the language of Judah. They didn't want to speak them in Hebrew because the people understand it. Because what they're hearing, people understand that. They said, hey, my master said to speak to everybody. Not just the guy sitting in the wall. And then he really puts them down. I mean, they got real back then. You're doomed. You're going to eat your own dookie and drink your own piss. Straight out. Hey, this is what's going to happen, you guys. They're very down and at it. Then Joshua called, and he called out and said, hear the word of the great king, the king of Assyria. Thus says the king, do not let Hezekiah deceive you, for he will not be able to deliver you out of my hand. Do not let Hezekiah make a trust in the Lord by saying, the Lord will surely deliver us, and this city will not be given into the hand of the king of Assyria. Do not listen to Hezekiah, for thus says the king of Assyria. Friends, God doesn't like being put down. He does not like being insulted. You remember when David went up against Goliath? Goliath was dissing God. That's a good way to lose in the long run, because when God gets annoyed, he makes things happen. He's going to make sure that he and his people, if they're true to him, are going to come out a winner. Now look at this deceit. We're going to talk about deceit next week. Make a peace with me and come out to me. Then each will eat his own vine, each one his own fig tree, and each one of you will drink the water of his own cistern. Really? You're going to defeat us and we're going to have all this nice conditions in our own place? Watch carefully. Until I come and take you away to a land like your own land, a land of grain and wine, a land of bread and vineyards, a land of olive trees and heaven, that you may live and not die. First step. I'm taking you away. You're captives. You're slaves. Yeah, you got to listen between the lines, friends. It's deceitful. Do not listen to Hezekiah mislead you by saying, the Lord will deliver us. Has any of the God's nation ever delivered his land out of the hand of the king of Syria? So, hey, all those gods have been stomped. They didn't work for them. It's not going to work for you. And then he lists them. Where are the gods of Hamath and Arpad? Where are the gods of Shepharim, Hanan, Avath? Have they delivered Samaria out of my hand? The answer was no. He had defeated all of them, which is why he felt so superior and so confident. Who among all the gods of lands have delivered their lands out of my hand, that the Lord should deliver Jerusalem out of my hand? Excuse me. The Lord of Jerusalem is the real Lord. Those are all idols you're worshiping. He didn't know the difference. But the people silent answered him not a word, because the king said, don't answer him. People were obedient. Then the delegation went back to Hezekiah with the clothes torn and told him the words of the Rabshakeh, the prime minister. And when he heard it, he tore his clothes, covered himself with sackcloth, and went into the house of the Lord. And then he said, Eliakim, who was over the household, Shebna the scribe, the elders and priests covered the sackcloth to Isaiah the prophet, the son of Amos. So he sent the delegation to the prophet, and they had a very active and powerful prophet at the time, who was Isaiah. Let's take a moment, a little bit here to understand this a little better. Sackcloth was a type of clothing, a material for clothing, which was commonly worn by people then who wanted to demonstrate or show to the Lord how repentful they are. And we still have sackcloth nowadays. It's not commonly used, or burlap. As you can see here, it's a very coarse cloth, relatively easy to manufacture, not very comfortable to wear. It's quite the opposite of fine linen. This is, even to our day, it's sometimes used as clothing. This type of material is commonly used for feed bags and to find a way to contain coarse material. For example, you can still buy coal. People don't do it much anymore. You still buy coal in sacks. And so you'd have maybe a 1,500-pound sack of coal, and it'll be a very coarse sack like that. But here we see illustrated calf chow, cattle feed, or you might find dog food or the like. Now, plastic has pretty much taken over this market. We don't see bags like this anymore. But if you go back in 100 years or so, this is very common. So we see the calf chow here. Potatoes are also bagged in, and people, sometimes, poor people particularly, used it for clothing because they didn't have money for cloth. And on the right, we see exhibited someone, not John the Baptist himself, but a similar situated person, wearing very coarse clothing, certain type. Women, of course, are the ones then and now who make most of the purchases for a household, such as for flour. We see here on the right where the manufacturers have got smart. You're trying to sell to women, you don't want to have a bunch of ugly things. So they prettied up the bags. They made them a little bit nicer. Women, of course, would want to buy the nicer ones. It might cost a couple of pennies more, but they could afford it. That'd be nice. So end up with situations like this. We see this family, all the children obviously have had clothing made from flour bags, which came from the same manufacturer. So we can relate to this a little bit nowadays. It's kind of historic, but that's when we read about sackcloth in the Bible, this is what we're talking about, this coarse, very coarse material which is used to occasionally make clothing or used to make bags to contain coarse materials. So we come back here. The delegations brought a message from Hezekiah the king, and they're presenting it to Isaiah the prophet. This is a bad day. They're blasphemy. They're blaspheming our God. What do we do? And he says, maybe the God will hear the words. This are a reproach to the living God. Remember, we mentioned them a minute ago. And will rebuke them. Therefore, lift up a prayer, Isaiah. Lift up a prayer for the remnant, the people that are left. So they continue. Isaiah said to them, gave him response. Thus you say to your master, thus says the Lord, do not be afraid of the words which you've heard with which the servants of the king of Syria have blasphemed me, putting down God. Surely I will send a spirit upon him, and he shall hear a rumor and return to his own land. I will cause him to fall by the sword in his own land. So God of his own caused confusion. It's not the only example in the Bible. Enough confusion among those who intended to attack God's people that they end up dying without Hezekiah having to endure a long siege, or they have to send an army or fight or do anything. God was their army. He was a shield. He defended them. He protected them. God did that then, friends, and he's willing to do things for us now. Probably not so dramatic, but God has, and he does. Let's think about David. David was anointed king, but it was years before he ever got to take the throne because King Saul was still on it, and King Saul was not just a big guy. He was big in the head as well, and he couldn't see his own behavior. He sent troops out to chase David, and David was kind of like a hunted dog for a while, running from cave to cave with a band of 400 men. Eventually, Saul died, his wickedness was just overwhelming, and then he finally became king. The question we should be asking ourselves when we consider this, friends, is while we wait on the Lord for the relief, for what's been promised, are we growing? Or what are we doing in the interim? Well, John told us, let not your heart be troubled, neither let it be afraid. We shouldn't be quaking in our boots and worrying so much if we have faith in God. We may find ourselves in a situation like this awful roadway has been washed out. Or maybe maybe our roadway isn't washed out. It has all sorts of potholes and rocks that have fallen down from above. It's really awful. We don't know how we're going to get to the other side. But friends, we need to remember, God's the bulldozer. He can push all that stuff out of the way. He can open the road. He can make a way for us so that we can move forward. So we need to, as John wrote, don't be faithless. Believe, even when you can't see the road ahead. Because, as the psalmist wrote, even mountains melt like wax before God, before the Lord of all the earth. There's nothing too big for him that he can't move. Isaiah told us, I am the Lord who opened a way through the waters, make a dry path through the sea, and called forth the mighty arm of Egypt with all his chariots and horses. And what happened? They all drowned beneath the waves. Because God opened the way, and then he snuffed them out like a candle. It's nothing compared to what I'm going to do. For I'm about to do something new. See, I've already begun. Do you not see it? With our human eyes, no, we can't readily see it, friends, but in faith we can. He'll make a path through the wilderness, create rivers in the dry wasteland. By faith we can see this, friends. In Colossians we read, for this reason also since the day of heard, do not cease to pray for you, to ask that you may be filled with the knowledge of his will and wisdom and spiritual understanding. What should we do, friends? We should be praying till we can understand and know God's will better and have understanding. Meantime, remain calm. And great blessings belong to who? Those whom you discipline. Sometimes we need to be disciplined, friends. We need to be straightened out. But you'll help us keep calm. You'll help them until the wicked are put in their graves. Because the Lord of heaven's arm swore an oath. It's all going to happen according to my plan. I've decided it's the way it's going to happen. We need to have faith in that, friends. But the enemy comes. Oh, he's going to change our circumstances. He's going to distract us. We're going to have a flat tire when we're running late. Get a parking ticket or have to deal with something when it's most inconvenient. We're already overloaded and overworked, and we get some more stuff dumped on us. After a while, we can't focus. We can't on what we're supposed to be doing. All these things are a ploy to keep us away from God, friends. When these wayward thoughts stuff comes into your head, shush, get out of here. Don't listen to it. We need to refuse to believe in all these distractions and things the devil's going to send to you, and they're mostly in your mind. I mean, situations are real, but how you think about it and respond to them is a mental thing. Then we experience God's presence, be revived, stabilized, renewed, recognizing God is there. The psalmist says, cast your burden on the Lord, and he shall sustain you. He shall never permit the righteous to be moved. Can we believe that, friends? When times get tough, when it seems like we don't matter, and God's forgotten us, he hasn't. Hebrews says, the just shall live by faith. If we're righteous, if we respect man's relationship with God and divine things, with a holy fervor. But if we drop back and shrink, we have no faith, God has no pleasure in us. We've got to have that faith, friends, because Jesus is the one who can bridge the gap. He's the only one who can bridge the gap. Our believing in him, our following him, we can get across that chasm. Question I'd like to leave you today is, when you come to chasm in your life, who do you turn to? Yes, get defeated, follow Satan, think God, you just don't matter to God, he's forgotten you. He hasn't, friends. Realize God is with you, and you do matter to him. Do you realize that?